ZV that I've run across. You managed to get last in the alphabet after Mr. Zimmerman, who's sitting right next to you. So Pauline is from the HUD office here in Salt Lake City. We'll also be joined a little later on by Rick Garcia, who's the regional administrator for HUD, based out of Denver, and the senior sustainability advisor to Secretary Sean Donovan. So we'll be pleased to hear from him later on. Excuse me. And then after the resource team bios and pictures, you see a brief section of staff. These are people I am going to point out to you by name, number one, because they have done a lot of the heavy lifting to create this event, and number two, they'll be really useful for you over the next couple of days as you discover things that you think should be working a little bit differently, or opportunities you see that you think we should take advantage of. So I'll start, you've met me. Let me introduce from the ISC staff, Deb Perry, who's straight here in the back, and Becky Weber. So you've probably got an email from Becky and maybe also from Deb over the last month as we've put this event together. So feel free to approach them with anything you need or any comments you have. And also from Envision Utah, Christy Ostala is back here. Christy has helped us put this event together. Her fingerprints are all over it. And Amy Thompson, who is perhaps not in here right now, but we'll introduce Amy to you later when she comes back into the room. I'm sure she's managing some detail right now. So there's, the resource team and staff. Allow me a brief advertisement for the Institute for Sustainability, my employer. Our mission is to help communities around the world address their environmental, economic, and social challenges. You can read this. We've completed 94 projects in 27 countries over 22 years as an organization. So we are, there are about 75 of us now in 5 countries, about half here in the US. Our approach to capacity building, as I summarized earlier, relies on peer learning and training workshops like this, efficient access to information such as that in documents like the one we just went through, but also in our website that I'll highlight in just a moment, and some ongoing support and direct engagement with communities. This is a website with, I believe it may hold the title of the world's longest URL. If not, it's got to be close. It's sustainablecommunitiesleadershipacademy.org. The good news is you only have to type it once, and then your browser will remember it for you. But it's the home for the repository, essentially, for our experience running. I can't even remember the number offhand. A large number of these workshops over the last 5 years in our US program. I'll give you the stats in just a second. Lots of case studies, best practices, and such there for your use. There you go, 450 communities that we've worked with over the 5 years of our US program, and over 1,600 people like yourselves. So here is the brief ISC advertisement. Let me summarize by saying, reiterating as I did at the beginning, reiterating what I said at the beginning, which is that this is your event. This needs your energy to succeed. I've been in workshops before where for whatever reason the dynamic was a flat one. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We won't let it happen. So invest your energy. Again, temperature's off. You see an opportunity to meet with someone who you don't know and you'd like an introduction. There's an item or there's a topic that you don't see represented in the agenda that you think really should be. Please come up, talk to me, Becky, Christy, or Amy, and highlight that for us, because we manage this on the fly and we can adapt. Your real-time feedback on those notes, as I just said, is always welcome. Your more formal feedback will also be welcome at the end of this event. We have an extensive feedback form, electronic, that we'll distribute at the end of tomorrow, and we pay attention to those results. The success of this event is built very much on what we've heard from previous ones. So please, when you receive that feedback form by email tomorrow night, please respond to it. And with that, I'm going to say thank you. I see Robert over here. My next task is to introduce Robert Grow to you. I'm going to make use of, as you will over the next 3 days, the packet of biographies here. First by clumsily flipping to the correct page, and not by reading from it. But I do know that Robert Grow and his work here in the Wasatch Front region, and hopefully he's not listening right now because this would be embarrassing, influenced me greatly in my career path. As I mentioned, I was a transportation engineer and planner, and in retrospect, probably contributing more to problems than solutions for the first part of my career. And it was looking at the way that transportation planning could be used in a really scenario-based, forward-looking way to help regions figure out what they wanted to be in the future, not what they were forced to become by traffic projections. That influenced the direction of my career terrifically. So I'll fully credit the work in the late 90s and early 2000s of Envision Utah under Robert's leadership and with the contributions of many others. As I mentioned, I'll spare you reading his entire bio now, but I will note that Robert recently returned within the last year or 2 years to head up the Envision Utah organization that he was one of the founding contributors to back in the late 90s. And under its leadership, it's part of our capacity building program nationally. So the Envision Utah model and the Wasatch Front and Salt Lake City model continues to inform the planning and success of many other regions around the country. And I think I will draw my introduction to a close with that and welcome Robert. Here's where we failed.
Start walking this way. The first thing I'm going to do is take advantage of this privilege and honor to introduce Salt Lake City's Mayor Ralph Becker, who, as usual, walked in perfectly on time. Ralph is an extraordinary mayor. We have been lucky, blessed, I don't know all the words I'd use to explain to you how good we feel about having him as mayor. Ralph was actually born and grew up in Washington, D.C. And maybe you could tell them how you got to the West. But he got here to Utah and fell in love with Utah. I think that was about 30 years ago. And has spent his life here. He's very active outdoorsman, river rafting, backcountry skiing, mountain climbing, everything else you can do. If you want to have breakfast with Ralph, you have to pick a place where he can ride his bike to get there, because he's not only one who advocates for things, but actually lives his life demonstrating. And I remember meeting him for breakfast many years ago, and he rode up on his bike, and I felt a little guilty. Not guilty enough to give up my car, but a little guilty. Ralph has a degree in law from the University of Utah, a master's in planning as well. He started out as a professional planner here in the state at a company called Bear West, and became involved in the early days of Envision Utah. What we were doing, we became involved with him, and then he spent 11 years in the state legislature, and then became our mayor in 2008. I don't think any city in the country has undergone more change under a mayor than we have seen in Salt Lake under Ralph's leadership. So, first of all, we're going to invite Ralph up to welcome you and just talk for a little while about implementing the regional vision. What has happened here in the last 10 to 15 years? How has it changed, and how has Salt Lake City taken that lead? So, with that introduction, Ralph, there are the 6 goals of the vision.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Salt Lake City. We're a place that loves our area when it snows, so thank you for bringing snow to us. And hope you enjoy a chance to get out. I think it's supposed to clear up later today or tomorrow. And hope you can get out and enjoy our community while you're here as well. Bob, thank you for those very kind comments. Bob and I go way back, as you can probably tell, and like most of you in your communities, we have I'd say a very tight-knit group of folks with wildly differing points of view, but who come together in a way that has been remarkable for really going back 20 years now, I think, to what was the predecessor to Envision Utah, called the Coalition for Utah's Future. That the Envision Utah was a part of, and then basically absorbed the Coalition for Utah's Future. And you're going to hear a lot, I know, about how we've come together in a bottom-up approach towards regional visioning and working as communities and as partners, private and public, and all levels of government. To accomplish things that I think when this began we would have thought was impossible, unrealistic, and not maybe a reflection of who we are as a community. As Bob mentioned, I've had the great fortune of living here now for 40 years this year. And as serving as mayor the last 6 years. I was warped for about 11 years when I served in the state legislature. And thrilled to be mayor in a city that is not only, I think, increasingly dynamic, whether you look at what's happening in our downtown, whether you look at what's happening with our regional transportation systems and mobility, whether you look at the University of Utah and that incredible way that it spawns economic opportunities, whether you look at the increasing diversity in our community and how that strengthens us in ways that I think we're even just beginning to tap. It's a city that is dynamic, but for me, I think what is most compelling and gives me energy every single morning from the second I wake up is that in this community, particularly in Salt Lake City, there is a common sense of purpose and almost mission for who we are, what we want to be, and a commitment to getting there. And that comes from residents, it comes from businesses, and it comes from not just Salt Lake City government, but our partners in local government in the region. In Salt Lake, we have our role to play, is the way that I like to think of it. And Salt Lake City's population is about 1/10 of the population of the whole region. Our geography is even smaller. It is the north end of this valley. And yet, I think because going back to the time when this state was settled, it holds a particularly strong hold on what happens in the region and in the state. When Utah was settled and when it became a state, up till the time and through the time it became a state, it was basically a theocracy, right? I mean, the Mormons settled this valley, and they dominated every decision that was made here. And the unique byproduct of that is that when we became a state in 1896, after 7 tries, every single major state institution was located here. When you look at your states, the major state institutions got scattered all over the place, right? The state capitol was in one place, the flagship university was in another place, the corrections folks were in another place. The institutions got spread around, but here, every single state institution, major institution, was located here. And that is a reflection not only of kind of the congregation of governmental decision-making, but everything that surrounds it. It's like many of the largest cities, it's also the financial center. We are the cultural and arts center for the region and for the state, and draw on an area well outside of the state and beyond. And that has created really some interesting byproducts. Some of them are wonderful and some of them aren't as great. But so for example, our population, daytime population doubles every day, but with the way local taxes are set up, we don't get the benefit of all of the people who we serve, financially, so we have to be pretty creative. But when it comes to regional activities, Salt Lake City, I think, surprises people, both by its diversity and by how progressive it is. The majority and a growing majority every year of our students in our schools are minorities. We have well over 100 languages spoken in our public schools in Salt Lake City. We have a population that kind of defies much of the rest of Utah in that it is liberal. Truly liberal. I can't get liberal enough in Salt Lake City, and I'm a fairly liberal guy. But it's really a reflection of just how progressive this city is. So whether it comes to social justice items, like protecting and enhancing the rights of minorities and the LGBT community, whether it's environmental matters, where there's this deep, strong commitment to preservation of open space, and restoration of areas that have been damaged, like in many of your areas, whether it's rivers or air or land, or whether it's a willingness and desire to invest in transit and in how we use our energy. You've been hearing, we'll hear a lot about our transportation system, which has literally been a revolution with an investment, particularly in rail. We've got a long ways to catch up now with the rest of our transit system to flesh it out. But that backbone of rail is unequaled anywhere in the United States outside of the large urban areas on the coast, and probably in Chicago, where rail became a centerpiece a century ago. Whether it's in a desire to overhaul within the community our education system so there's equal opportunity for all folks, and we really focus on bridging the achievement gap. Those items I can take on and we can take on as a community very aggressively because there is such strong support and a common sense of purpose about addressing those issues. The work that Envision Utah has done goes certainly far beyond, I think, what we could have hoped for or expected, certainly many years ago. Because unlike other parts of the country, and I've increasingly appreciated this as I interact with mayors and local government officials from around the country, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, where I'm first vice president, or in various gatherings. What Envision Utah has enabled us to do is to take some of these progressive concepts and reach into our public and with community leaders to really explore what is it that people want for the future, and then to translate that into action. As I said, that's probably best reflected in the way transit has been completely overhauled in the last 14 years here, 15 years now. And Envision Utah has played an important role, and in a way a quiet role, maybe subversive role. I don't want to ever attribute that to you, Robert, and the good work that Natalie has done at the state level. But in many respects, I think it almost was, whether it was completely conscious or intentional or not. Because what Envision Utah did was they asked people to look at where we were headed if we continued on our ongoing approaches to community development. And then to lay out for the community in ways that are fully comprehensible and engaging what alternative scenarios might look like for our future. And people, I think to the surprise of many folks, and we saw the same thing happen when we were down in southwestern Utah in an effort called Vision Dixie. People chose differently for what they wanted their communities to look like and feel like and be like in the future, whether it's land consumption, whether it's transportation, whether it's desires for open space, the kinds of things that we think of as maybe a norm for what we want for community development are also embraced in a very visceral way by our public in this region. And this enabled them to time and again approve transit taxes on ourselves to develop this rail system we now have that hopefully some of you are able to take coming in from the airport, getting here, which just opened in April. That was the 6th of 7 rail lines that have opened in the last 5 years. So it's been an incredible pace, and Envision Utah has really provided the foundation for that work in the community and with community level, community leaders, private, public, up and down and across the spectrum. We do have an enormous challenge in this valley. These spectacular mountains that are what attracts many of us, certainly including me, to move here and live here. Also serve as the catchment basin for air pollutants. And in the winter particularly, this time of year with fresh snow like this, you don't see it, but I'm going to guess over the next couple of days, if we don't get another storm blow through quickly, you'll see this inversion buildup and air quality that is a drag on our efforts to move forward and to build on the quality of life that we have here. And it's an interesting phenomenon because if you look at standard measures of air pollution, we have reduced air pollution significantly in this region. And yet, that is both not the effect on people, and it isn't therefore the reality for those of us who are in the business of translating those with the public. And so I think we're really at such an important point in this region to address air quality in ways that are not going to be easy, but we certainly have the foundation to be able to do, and the kind of coalescing that we get around issues. My experience is that usually elected officials are well behind their publics, and I think that's true here as much, or maybe in some cases more than in other places, and our job is to help push some of our elected officials to join the effort to take actions that aren't always easy, whether that's increasing taxes to improve transit, increasing gas taxes, no one likes those, very few people do, or whether it's reshaping how we do basics like planning and zoning or other the nuts and bolts of how community development occurs. We have a long ways to go. And fortunately, for us, again, Envision Utah has stepped forward and is at the really beginning stages, but hopefully we'll quickly help galvanize our community again around the approaches that are going to work best. We're a week away from when our state legislature starts, and we usually hold our breaths for 45 days to see what the outcomes are. And they will have in front of them a lot of measures, including some that I put forward last week, to much more aggressively tackle air quality issues so that we build on this incredible set of assets we have in this community and still have the kind of future we want, whether we look at it from a prosperity point of view, from a health point of view, or from our overall quality of life. So with that, I'm going to stop. I know we've got 2 or 3 presentations. I'm hoping to join in the discussion here, but I thank you all for being here. I wouldn't be mayor if I didn't ask you to please spend as much money as you can, more, maybe more. But it's great having you here. I know this kind of exchange of discussion and ideas is what makes a huge difference in all of us being successful, and I thank the grants that all of us have received for allowing us to advance much more quickly the kind of integrated, comprehensive approaches we need to be successful. So thank you.
My daughter-in-law, April Everett from Knoxville, says hello. And I had a chance to have dinner with my in-laws a couple years ago. We were there at a conference in your region. I also have one of my brother-in-law's wives is from Madison, Wisconsin. They're over here somewhere, right? So welcome to Utah. Unlike me in my normal form, I am only going to have about 12 PowerPoint slides. I'm going to do them quickly. Then I'm going to invite Ralph and Natalie Gochnour to come up and participate with me in a discussion about our region. Envision Utah was founded in 1997. About the same time, a Harvard professor created the theory of disruptive technologies. How many of you are familiar with that economic development theory of disruptive technologies? It's a fascinating approach of how something like the PC could sneak up on IBM and almost kill the largest, most powerful computer company in the world. And why IBM did not see it coming, and how it literally almost destroyed IBM. And IBM kept saying, well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to my customers. It doesn't matter to me. Why would we pay any attention to those toys? How many of you ever saw a Commodore 64, that original sort of PC to get in your house? See, some of you have enough gray hair like me to remember the Commodore 64. Well, the theory of disruptive technologies is how do you take some big moving industry or concept or method or system of doing something, and how with not much capital you can disrupt it in a way that changes direction of a whole industry. And you can think of other disruptive technologies in other spaces besides computers, but that's probably the best example. Envision Utah was actually created quietly along the lines of the disruptive technology in the way our urban areas grows. It was intended to do what the then seated governor once accused me of having done, and that was to create a shadow government where the public would actually have a voice and derail a lot of where we were going and cause a rethinking of how that happened. So Ralph accused us of being subversive. We are not subversive. But our intention was to get the public to rethink and see and understand how growth patterns were affecting their personal lives and what they really wanted long term, and to decide if that's really where they wanted to go or whether we should change direction. So basically in 1997 we were facing a bunch of urban growth challenges. In the 80s we had a terrible period where we had a large out-migration, we lost jobs and so on. By the mid-90s we had picked up a real head of steam on economic development. We're growing rapidly. I won't go through these challenges, but they're pretty typical of most regions that are growing. And we did a visioning process, and there were really three characteristics of that process that mattered in my view. Number one was we brought people together, and we brought together stakeholders who were really grass tops, but their job was not to decide things. Their job was to run a process, to invite the grassroots to respond to choices. And the grass tops were there also to go through this process of thinking about choices for the future and to learn themselves. And so the two big benefits were the grass tops learned, the grassroots had an opportunity to express their view and learn as well. And with that, we created a learning community about the way we were growing. The second thing we did after we gathered people together was to understand and study the values of people here in Utah. Ralph talked about being liberal. Now, it depends on where you stand in Utah about sort of politics. He mentioned we got to become a state after 7 tries. We had to have a two-party system to become a state. That was one of the reasons we failed to get in, because, as he correctly stated, the Mormons sort of dominated things. So they sent leaders to every Mormon congregation in Utah and said, right down the middle of this congregation, you on that side are Democrats and you on that side are Republicans from now on. We had a two-party system in Utah. We're perfectly fine, okay? Which side of the room were my family on? My family were mainly on, I think, the left side of the room. So I actually come from a family where my father was a proud Democrat and my mother was for quite a while, but ended up arguing with my father. But we have portions of this state which are very, very conservative. We have portions that are liberal. And the trick is to bridge those. The secret is how to bring them together, and you do that with values. When we did these value studies, we found that all Utahns love that mountain range. All of them did. Now, they might have a slightly different approach of how to deal with them, but everybody wanted to protect and preserve our wetlands, our rivers, our mountains, and so on. And that's just one example where the values really overlap. The last secret was to use scenarios. The public does not like to be told what to do. They like to see their choices. They're always suspicious when somebody only gives them one choice, one direction to go. I remember when we founded Envision Utah, I went to meet with the very conservative Speaker of Utah's House of Representatives. And I could tell this was going to be a really hard sell, that we needed some money from the legislature for some tools to do modeling. And after a few minutes, I said to him, "You like UDOT, Utah Department of Transportation." And he, in a very grumpy voice, said, "No." And I said, "Tell me why not?" He says, "Because they show up here every year and they want a bunch of money and I never know if I have any choices." And I said, "Well, the scenarios we're going to run will actually show you if you have any choices." And that was what persuaded him to work with us to get the tools we needed for the original visioning exercise. And so scenarios, choices, was really the third secret, and done in a way which was open, believable, trusted by the public as well as the grass tops, and represented by a large group of stakeholders who sort of held the common ground while we went through this process. These are some of my grandkids. I show this because When I think about visioning, I always think about children, not about us in the room. And I think about what will my children's life be like. Now, my oldest daughter is 40 this year. She's a law professor, a brilliant, varsity past what all of her do in life. And I have children from 27 to 40, and I have more grandchildren than this now. But when I think about the visions, I always reflect back on what will life be like when these kids are my age. And the little boy in the red shirt is exactly 50 years younger than me. So I think about generations. And visioning is about that. And implementing visioning is about continuing to get people to come together around long-term concepts and beliefs and things that they want and desire in their lives, and then to backward integrate that to the present. So Ralph talked a little bit about our heritage. This is an artist rendering of the first two pioneers that came in the Salt Lake Valley. They wandered around looking at the resources and so on. They shared a horse. So this was Utah's first high occupancy vehicle. They shared the ride. But within a couple years, we saw a city growing here. What's the most unique characteristic of Utah geographically? If you look at the way the city was laid out as planners, it's the wide streets, right? It's the big wide streets. We can't take a longer light rail train than anywhere else in America without blocking the cross street, which is a real advantage sometimes. But we had a history of planning in Utah, but we sort of lost that history. And as Ralph mentioned, Envision Utah was formed in 1997. It was nonprofit, nonpartisan, and voluntary. It was actually sponsored by the Coalition for Utah's Future, and it was a partnership of business, government, and community leaders seeking to find better directions for Utah. The area we focused on then was 10 counties. We now focus on the whole state. But even in those 10 counties, there were lots of people. These are just the layers of government, plus about hundreds of developers, realtors, and key stakeholders in the region. We brought those people together into lots of meetings where they discussed and struggled with how we could best find the kind of future people we wanted. I put up this cartoon because not everybody was overjoyed with the creation of Envision Utah. There was some political suspicion that Envision Utah, see that he's got a gun behind his back as well as a carrot, a rabbit's a city. There was a real fear that we were there to take away the rights of local government. That was not our intention, never has been. Envision Utah this day has absolutely no authority to do anything. We are nothing but sort of a place where people come together and have a dialogue about the future. So we focused on values because values are stable, enduring. They're the tides of our lives as opposed to the waves. They're what makes us tick. They're what makes us decide the things we decide. If you can understand the values of your community, you can really focus in on a future that plays strongly, not just with their head and their intellect, but with their heart as well. We did scenarios to contrast the choices. We did a major public awareness campaign where surveys went out to 600,000 homes in Utah. Over 20,000 people answered the surveys and attended workshops to show us what they wanted. Attitudes changed. After the visioning process, 88% of Utahns wanted to expand the rail system. After they saw scenarios with the choices yes and no to do that. By the way, I love this picture because Ralph is largely responsible for that spectacular piece of artwork, that escalator that goes between the light rail system. You see the front run of the commuter rail system. Many of you may see that tomorrow. But this is a spectacular change for Utah. In addition, there were changes in attitudes about housing, about accommodating a wide selection of housing in our communities. That was a 3-to-1 attitude in favor of housing accommodation based on age, and then housing accommodation based on income. It was a 4-to-1 change. Walkable developments in Utah. This is really Utah's first look at if we created these mixed-use walkable communities, what would they be like with 3-to-1 support for those after visioning. A lot of things have happened in Utah, but one of the benefits is that we have a long-range plan. Businesses that come to Utah can see that we not only think about being fiscally sound, but we think about creating and continuing to create great places. And Forbes rated Utah as the best place to start a business over the last 3 years. So with that, I'm going to invite my friends back up. Ralph, you want to grab a mic, and Natalie, grab a mic, and I'm going to sit down with you here. We're going to talk about actually what happened. How did this happen in Utah? Because it sounds easy when I do it with a few slides, but it wasn't quite that easy. Now, my friend Natalie Gochnour was actually in the governor's office of planning and budget. She's now associate dean of the business college at the University of Utah. She's been the chief economist and head of policy at the Chamber of Commerce, so was heavily involved with the business community after she left the state where she worked with how many governors?
3 different governors.
3 different governors. And she'll tell you how it felt to get into this, but I remember going up to Natalie's office when we were working on these scenarios, and I had a radio phone. Put this big clunker, it's like the original cell phone, except it only ran the radios. I ran a big steel company at that point. So I put this thing down on the table and I'd spin it. And I remember her years later talking about my nervous habit of talking about the future and spinning my big clunky cones. See, now we've all gone to these. But a lot has changed since my big clunky phone and this, and that's what I'd like to talk about. How did we get there? So I'm going to turn the time over to Natalie first, and Natalie's going to talk for a minute, then I can start asking questions. Let's go from there.
Welcome. Nice to see you. Welcome to our beautiful city. I'm a native Salt Laker and spent some time working in D.C., but other than that, I have called Utah home. And I love Mayor Becker. We have a terrific capital city mayor. I don't live in the city. He's not my mayor, but he's mayor of the region. And it's been a fond friendship that we've had for many, many years. And the same thing with Robert Groh. Robert Groh is this visionary leader that has transformed this region. And you've seen some of the fruits of that, and in your tours you'll see more of it. I just wanted to put out a couple of little thoughts, and then I'll open it up for conversations, and then we're going to open it up for you to ask us some questions. But I'm a big fan of collaboration. Now that's, sounds like kind of a buzzword when we talk about partnerships and collaborations, cooperation. We talk about those things all the time, but I have been the beneficiary of great leaders who promote principles of collaboration. And I thought it would be helpful to just put a couple of those on the table, because all of them were part of Envision Utah's success. Point number 1, and I'd love it if you took notes on these, because these are kind of neat. Number 1, you have to have common pain. And that is to say that you have to have hurt. You have to have some reason for coming together. Now in Envision Utah, Robert expressed the pain we had. We had diminishing critical lands. We had air quality that wasn't what we wanted it to be. We had extreme growth pressures. This was our common pain. The second point is we needed a convener of stature. And a convener of stature can be someone like a governor. It can be a senior business leader. In Envision Utah's case, it was both. A third one that you need is you need to have committed leaders. And of course, Envision Utah had that in droves. Committed leaders like the mayor of Salt Lake. Committed leaders like Robert Groh. Next point is we needed to have a clearly defined purpose. We had to take these people that come from all different walks of life and have them pointing to a direction that we all agreed to. And it's actually really good if you write that up as a formal charter. So that would be another point. So clearly defined purpose written up in a formal charter. Then, since I'm a technical person, an economist by training, you have to have a common database. It's hard to bring disparate voices together if you don't have people looking at the same data, accurate data to inform decision making. Two last points. You need to have public input, public involvement. You need to hear what people think. You will always learn. And then the final point would be the issue has to be right. It's something that we call in the business the northbound train. That is to say that if the community's not ready for the issue, you can do all these steps and it will take you a long, long time to be successful. You have to be able to read the tea leaves and know if the critical mass is there to go get something done. And that's related to common pain because common pain creates rightness for these things. All right, so Mayor Becker, I've just thrown out a whole bunch of ideas of why Envision Utah was successful because we captured all of those things in a major collaboration. You have some observations you want to make?
Sure. So I've been involved with one way or another Envision Utah from its beginning, and what Robert and Natalie have talked about, I think, are right on target. And I'll just mention this in a few ways because there are different ways that regions go about getting things done. You look at the Portland area, you look at the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and they actually have a structured regional government that we really don't see in that form anywhere else. And then it goes all the way down to where, other than the federally required metropolitan planning organization, there's nothing. We're actually in the close to the nothing stage in terms of the formal structures. And yet we've come together as a region. I think I didn't appreciate how unusual that is until I started talking with mayors in just about every one of your cities in my interactions with local government officials, elected officials, and with folks at HUD and in other places. And they would go, "You guys work together, how do you do that?" And to be honest with you, I never really thought we worked together necessarily that well, so it shows how far we have to go. But there's this whole gradation. I think we all have to look at our own region. But as it relates to Envision Utah, maybe I'll mention a couple things. And there have been some nice write-ups on Envision Utah over the years. But as I looked at Envision Utah, there's some things that were done uniquely well. One, as Natalie mentioned, such a critical part of this is having our public, or publics, united around what it is we're trying to do. And even in a place, when I talk to the mayor of Portland and the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul, even though they have regional governments there, it is very tough for them to get things done over time if the public is not with them. And we saw that at, what was it called, 37, the initiative that overturned, really, metropolitan government in the way it was established in Portland a number of years ago. And they've kind of retracked it and redone it. And that is really reinforced as I talk to those elected officials. So a unique element of this, I think, that I've seen with Envision Utah is that ability to get the public from the everyday person who really does not often get involved to the community leaders in various sectors together around a common set of objectives. And that is, I didn't realize how unique it is, but it's really quite unique. One way that Envision Utah did this, and I've never seen it done anywhere else nearly as effectively, or in so many instances even at all, is to involve the media in the decision-making of the organization. So on the board of Envision Utah are the heads of the leading media outlets of this state. And that attracts their interest and attracts more media attention to what is being done, which then ignites the public and catalyzes the public to get much more involved. And I didn't really appreciate that in the beginning, but just observing over time, I think that's one area that has made a large difference. Now, with the way people get attention today, so different than it was when Envision Utah started in 1997. You didn't have any online surveys in 97, but now there's an opportunity, if we use social media well, to instead of touching tens of thousands of people, I really believe we can touch hundreds of thousands of people in this region and get them involved if we do it right. So that whole media piece of this and ingraining that from the beginning and embedding that in the whole process is sort of one point on that, and then maybe we'll get back to some other things.
Very good. Let's throw out another question. This one will come over to you, Robert, and ask you about, there's a...
I have to interrupt.
Please.
You want to explain your first experience with the media?
Which one is first? I'm trying to think.
The Tribune article.
Oh, sure.
Just
Okay,
to let
let's
you
have
know
fun.
everything's
Yeah, let's
not
have
always
fun.
exactly like you hope.
So I was involved with Envision Utah right from the very beginning, but as an economist helping manage the technical work.
She was hiding quietly in the governor's office.
And every once in a while I had to be on a panel, with other people, and I didn't like it that much because there was a lot of public attention with it, but I would grin it and bear it. And I got in a kind of heated debate with a developer. That wouldn't surprise people, right?
The,
Because that happens in
the
these
largest developer in Utah.
largest home builder in Utah. And anyway, I thought I acquitted myself pretty well, and life went on. But the next morning, I read the paper, and the first line in the paper said something like, "Natalie Gochnour has a bummer of a birthmark," and it was referring to the Far Side cartoon where the deer has a target as the birthmark. Can you picture a Far Side cartoon with a deer and it just says "bummer of a birthmark, Hal"? You know, he's got a target on him. That's kind of where Envision Utah came from, right? We came from an environment of this community we were pointing in all different directions. We were pointing all over the place. And it was through the process of bringing together committed leaders and representatives of substance and the common charter that we gradually educated ourselves to the point where we could make common decisions. So, Robert, one of the things that I've noticed in your leadership in doing this is balance is a really important part of community visioning processes. And that's because you have disparate viewpoints. And whenever you get too far to one extreme, you alienate the other extreme. How do you get into the productive middle where things get done? You're very smart at this, Robert. Give some advice to this crowd.
There was actually a secret in the organization of our original board of directors, which was a very large, it was a partnership and a board vote. And that was about a third of the people who were invited were government. About a third of the people were sort of the normal cast of representatives from groups who felt like they had the answers to our problems. But in the middle were a third of just highly respected citizens. Across the board, I mean, they weren't all alike, but they all had constituencies and they all cared about the future of Utah. And I've seen regional visioning efforts around the country where they get hijacked partly down the road. They don't have the breadth of interest and you can't hold the common ground. And so actually having that group of just, highly respected citizens in the middle. And I'll give you a business community example. Larry Miller was an honorary co-chair, which Larry Miller was the one who rescued the Jazz from being sold out of Utah, so our basketball franchise. He was Utah's sort of favorite guy for having done it. He's also the largest car dealer in the state. Frankly, one day said he'd give up a lot of those car sales to go back to the way Utah was earlier. But Larry helped hold sort of that common ground, that middle ground of public citizens. So I think that's one way to do it. The other is you actually have to work hard with individual stakeholders to hold their ground. That large developer stayed on the board of Envision Utah through the whole visioning process. And I spent a lot of hours with him because he was a friend. And so you have to watch your stakeholders very carefully, making sure you invite people in, making sure you don't lose people because something along the way trips them up and they're angry or upset. I remember following one of the mayors out of a meeting one day who was very concerned about something, and I saw him just get up in the middle of the meeting and head out the door, and I chased him out the door to find out what was going on. And then as we talked, I understood. So it's, I think, holding the middle ground, having those right people there from the beginning. I can't tell you how important it is that Mayor Becker stays involved, how much we appreciate his years and years and years of service in this public effort. And he's on the point of it on so many of the issues in Salt Lake City, but his presence there leavens the whole loaf, so to speak, of what happens to the future of the state.
Our mayor, our capital city mayor sitting next to me, has on his lapel a little pin. And you can't see it, but I can. He wears it frequently. And on the pin is written the word civility. So you heard our mayor say, hey, I'm a liberal Democrat, and I have a really hard time being liberal enough for my constituents. Did you hear that from a Salt Lake City mayor? You just did. And I mentioned I'm a native Utahn, and I can tell you that up in our legislature, it's a very different feel than what he's talking about. Once you go statewide, you'll find a very conservative ideology in the state. My point in bringing that up is I want to ask the mayor, knowing that he wears civility on his lapel, knowing that he represents the liberal stronghold of our state, how how is it that you, in your leadership, help bridge the gap between extremes in our state such that we are able to make grand progress for our citizens?
Well, I'm not sure I've done that, but I'll
We think you've done it
appreciate the credit there. But, you know, politics and in all of our worlds is so much a personal business. You know, it's about relationships. It's about how we get along with each other, regardless of our varying points of view. My mother and I are as far apart on the ideological spectrum as we could get. But, you know, we still love each other, and we still have heated conversations. And I think in Utah, to the extent I've been successful in things, it's two ways. One is having those certainly relationships, trying not to let differences in points of view get in the way of good conversation, and adapting regardless of my point of view, of trying to learn and respond and find ways to reach common ground. But the other piece of that, I think, is being opportunistic. And Natalie talked about that, but you know, there's a time that's ripe for anything. When I was in the legislature, one of the issues I was very interested in, the 11 years I was up there, was how do we change our energy picture? Energy is at the center of everything we do in our communities at any level, all the way up through global. And yet we, it's about the toughest place to see and make changes. And I had been saying, you know, we need to look at things like renewable energy portfolios, things that just went right past my colleagues in the legislature for the most part. And I was on an energy task force, and it had been going for 4 or 5 years. They dealt with deregulation and a series of issues. And in the last meeting of that task force, one of the most conservative members of that task force said, you know, I think we need an energy policy for the state. We don't have a formal energy policy. So I just jumped right in and said, well, I'll work on that with you. It's David Ure, many of us from here know how conservative David was. It still is. And we worked together for a year to put together an Energy Policy Act that got passed that included a lot of things that I believed were so important in terms of energy efficiency, renewable energy use in the future, and providing equal opportunities for different energy uses in the future. And I felt good about it. So some of it was just, the time was just finally right, and that's something I know we all try to do in our work, but it's almost the most important thing, particularly when you're a Democrat in Utah, so much in the minority.
Robert, we'll see if you have anything to add there. And as you add it, or when you're done, do you mind screening to the picture that showed the commuter rail, light rail, and the viaduct?
I thought you wanted to see my grandkids.
Yeah, I want to do that too, but I want to just segue that, and then we're going to toss it out to you to ask some questions for the last several minutes of this opening segment. That'll be perfect. Do you want to add anything to the civility, you know, bringing diverse interests together in the productive middle?
Yeah, I once had a visiting professor at MIT come and interview me about Envision Utah. And the way I described it to him was, what we really were trying to do was just the golden rule. You know, treat others as you would like to be treated. The whole process was designed around listening. If somebody had an idea they thought was a good idea, if you could put it in a scenario and test it out, and you did that. So you treated not only people with respect, but their ideas with respect. And it was always about modeling and applying the best data and tools that we could to look at the future. And so, you know, we could have a great debate about whether transit was important or not in Utah's future, but we were capable of actually doing scenarios that answered that question. So a lot of people feeling like they're part of the process and being respected is by taking their ideas and actually working with those ideas and working them into scenarios and modeling and asking better choices and bringing those people with you as you do it. So the civility is a lot about respecting people and treating them right. It's a lot about respecting their ideas. And the third thing I'd say is it's a lot about how you talk about things. In Utah, we call it quality growth. We didn't call it smart growth way back then. There was a reason for that. One was a flash word for some of the people in Utah. But quality growth is what we would decide growth out of. And that, so words really matter, communications really matter, values matter, and taking the fire out of some of those burning words, using something else, I think is important to civility as well.
Love it. I would just add that if I were to put another lapel pin on our mayor's jacket, I might put on the other side humility. And let me tell you why I mean that. When we talk about getting from one extreme to the other, Robert just mentioned you have to listen and you have to be respectful of the other point of view. And of course that takes a certain amount of humility because you actually have to recognize that maybe I don't know everything. And therefore I'm going to take a step closer to you. And on the other side, maybe I don't know everything, I'm going to take a step closer to you. So we put up this picture, and I just thought of this as a way to kind of close out our little discussion here and involve you.
Can I say one thing about that? The Tribune, on your State of the City address that you gave last week, the Tribune referred to you as normally wonkish. And I thought, I take that as a compliment, because the thing that I think is unique about us is we all believe in one thing you said, common data and studying ideas. None of us are ready to compromise over things we don't understand and appreciate the outcomes for. And so one of the reasons Ralph has been so successful is because he learns deeply about things, studies them, and respects other people's ideas as he does this. He is an intellectual at heart who's become a politician at the same time. But I think that's part of the attitude of Envision Utah has been, we are sort of wonkish in the way we approach things. We believe in modeling databases, and if you go on our website, you will see a whole bunch of brand new tools with the latest kinds of models and new databases to model our state down to every parcel of ground in many, many of our counties. And it's because we want everybody in the state to be able to do exactly what we've been doing at their scale.
So you heard it here first. Civility, humility, and then on the tie pin, wonkish. Check out this photograph with me for just 1 second. Think of your own communities and think of any given public decision that involves the built environment. And if you look at this picture, you see our commuter rail, something we call front runner. It's called that because of the Wasatch Front. It runs along the front. It's front runner. That's I don't know much about it, but a diesel train. Up on the top there, you see our light rail, our tracks train going over a bridge, but that's not really a bridge for just trains. That is actually a viaduct that goes over the freeway and the rail lines and carries a lot of cars. And so you have all of this coming together there, and the reason it's such an interesting picture to me is to make that happen took everything. It took a transit authority that leads and that's entrepreneurial and that gets things done. That's our Utah Transit Authority. It took a city that was willing to permit and make development work in this corridor. It took a state... It took a state legislature that was willing to take down a transportation corridor that's very important to get cars into our city. And maybe about, 6 years before it was supposed to come down, bring it down and put up the new ones so that we could service the light rail to the airport. Anyway, any one of those decisions is Herculean in terms of trying to get it done. But it happened. And it happened through the commitment and hard work of this community, and this is just one of many great examples. So now we want to toss it out to you and invite you to ask us questions, anything about our community or our processes, the things that we do, and it looks like they've got a mic there. You can address it to one of us or to all of us, and we'll go from there.
I now know why we are here, because of what you've done in Utah. I'm Tom Behan. I'm the mayor of the city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and with the Knoxville region. Can you tell us the structure, the infrastructure that's kept you going, the funding, the staff? I think I'm sitting here, we're just in the beginning, and I think that's one of the things that we as a group are interested in. I bet other people are too.
Well, Envision Utah is a nonprofit, so people can give it money and deduct it. That's important. Number two, we started out to do the visioning effort with a third budgeting, which meant a third from government, a third from foundations, a third from business or individuals. And that's the way we raised the first $1.5 million. But we also then gradually moved into getting more grants from foundations and into specific projects. So we have done what I would call implementation visioning. Ralph mentioned one, which was Vision Dixie. That's our South. We actually tried silkworms and cotton in our South, by the way, so where I think we get away with calling it Dixie. We've done a vision in Morgan County, which is up north and is over the Wasatch Back. We've done one in Bear Lake, which is a recreation area way up in northern Utah. We've got visioning efforts all over the place that have followed this process that I've described. But each one of those has raised its own funding from the constituents and stakeholders of that effort. And that's one of the things we've become good at in Envision Utah, is helping people lay out their issues in a way and describe a process where their local business and their local foundations and their local individuals want to contribute to make that happen. We've also had a sustaining grant, which has been about a fourth of our budget, from the largest foundation in the region, which is the Eccles Foundation, which has been incredibly helpful to us. They weren't that large as we did the original vision, but they ramped up to about a fourth of our budget and stayed there for about so that's how we're funded.
I want to add one comment there. I don't know how applicable it is, but it's just an observation I made over time. The corporate citizenship in this state is just phenomenal. My guess is it's also phenomenal in your regions. I've just found over time that businesses are very generous with their philanthropy. And I wanted to just point out this hotel. This is the Grand America Hotel. Are you staying in this hotel, or are you staying across the street? Okay. Well, same owner. This hotel, because we're, about a week away from Sochi? We're about 10 days or something away, not far. So the next Winter Olympic Games in Russia. This hotel was opened up right before the 2002 Olympic Winter Games. And a local businessman named Earl Holding built this hotel and accelerated the building of it to accommodate the games. We wanted to have this beautiful hotel here in time for the games. And I just got to tell you that in 2002, in this hotel, this is where the International Organizing Committee stayed, which is code for this was the best place in town to be. And, and at any time when you came by here, it was just filled with international visitors and all sorts of beautiful hats and coats and different things. If you spend a little time and walk around this hotel, you'll see just incredible chandeliers and drapery and furniture. Go explore. It's a really choice hotel. It's probably not worthy of the Salt Lake market. I'm just sort of saying that you might see this in a much larger market. And we had a business leader that paid cash for it to do it before the Olympic Games. You want to add anything, Ralph?
No, I'll just say I see Rick Garcia's here. Rick, good to see you. The other piece of this we really haven't talked about, but I think has been important, has been the partnership through the levels of government, local, state, and federal. And we see that obviously with this work that we're doing. But when I look at the work that's been done in the last several years through the Sustainable and Livable Communities, I'm going to get that wrong a little bit, program, where for the first time we're seeing at the federal level, transportation, and EPA come together. Now it's broadened with some other projects. That makes an enormous difference. And we know how difficult it is in our arenas to kind of break down those barriers. But when I look at what's been done here, privately and publicly, meshing all of those various sectors and levels, I think has been a real piece.
I'm going to squeeze in a quick question of my own, and then I'll ask whoever has the next question to raise your hand. Natalie, I was in the EPA Smart Growth Office when you were with Governor Levitt, Administrator Levitt at the time, and the Senate worked with the Chamber of Commerce here on some implementation, some new developments. And I know that folks here would love to hear about that experience. You referred to the importance of aggressive business leadership to actually make projects happen, and I'd be happy to hear more about your work there.
Great. Thank you. I'll just mention this. I saw something happen in this state that was remarkable. It happened in 2006. If you just think about it, 2006, 2007, part of 2008, that was the top of the boom in this country and in this state. In fact, we've been feeling the pains from, it was too much of a boom, right? We overreached. But in 2006 in this state, we were growing, our job growth was growing at about 5%. We had surpluses up on Capitol Hill. And there was this movement afoot to raise the sales tax to pay for more rail development. And you just try and think about, how is it in a conservative state that you raise taxes when you have a surplus, and you're raising it for transit? It's really a high, high bar. And I watched this amazing thing where this community just did the studies, looked at the work, and made the determination that we should raise our sales tax and put in 70 miles of rail in 7 years. And it passed with 2/3 majority in both of our major metropolitan counties. And I still, to this day, try to figure out, how did that happen? But what's so interesting is, had it not happened, think where we'd be right now. So that would take away our commuter rail down to Provo, and that would take away 4 of our 6 light rail lines. Am I doing my math right? 4 of our 7. It, just like that, right? And then our nation goes into this downturn, and then we have this fiscal crisis, and then we have complete paralysis in Washington, D.C. How long would it be before we did those rail lines? How long would it have been? It'd be 10, 15 years from now. Am I making a fair assessment? You know, it just kind of feels that way. So, you know, your question just reminds me that communities get what they deserve. And we have a community that looked forward and did their homework and put forward to the people a decision. And we made the right decision. And because of that, we will, as we continue to urbanize here, we will have a much, much higher quality of life and therefore a stronger economy. So that was more an observation. I didn't tell you how we did it, but I do think it was very important. I don't know if you two want to add anything.
My name is John Wood, Assistant City Manager and Director of Neighborhoods and Housing Services in the City of Kansas City, Missouri. On the issue of light rail, Kansas City is finally catching up a little bit. But if you did not have, and I don't know, first of all, how long have you been planning your light rail? And if you didn't have light rail, where would Salt Lake City be?
Well, the mayor mentioned the air quality issue as the standards have tightened. Thank goodness we've built a big part of the solution if we continue to evolve our urban form. So where would we be without it? Well, we'd be without one of the major tools to fix our air quality. Number 2, it became apparent from the original scenarios we were never going to build our way out of congestion. And so the mobility, we have lower vehicle miles traveled today in Utah than we did when we did the vision. And so I think that's surprising. It dropped around the country, but I think there's a big debate over why. But there are a lot of people riding rail. If that line was running up and down parallel to I-15, you'd have to build another 1 or 2 lanes on I-15 to handle rush hour right now. Right now, it's just shocking how much it's doing to the quality. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just a real quick follow-up. So how has the light rail, or has it enhanced economic development in the along the transfer? How has that changed to help?
So I'm gonna give my perspective, and then I'm gonna hand this mic to Ralph. But if you look at Salt Lake City, there was a vision done here called Downtown Rising a couple years ago. Natalie put that together, led it at the chamber. I was a convener, Ralph was a convener. We all came together and planned the future of this wonderful city in that process. And as part of that, it became clear to me that we kept Salt Lake City the center of this region with that rail system. That some of you are going to go see the new large City Creek Center. Some of you, you're going to see lots of different things at Salt Lake tomorrow, but all of them are on the rail line pretty much. And if you say, where's the largest TOD built in America in the last 10 years? It's going to be right here where you just go along these stops in downtown Salt Lake and look at what's there. New college campuses on the rail line, expansions of our conference center. Look at City Creek Center, Gateways now, which was right before the Olympics. And so that has kept all those, when he says that we double in size every day, Salt Lake City does. Well, a lot of them get there. And what's so fascinating is my daughter, who's a law professor, rode front runner up from where she lived, and then the light rail to get into downtown Salt Lake the other day. Because it was slippery outside, she didn't want to drive her car. So interesting to see what's motivating people to switch. So I think it's had a huge impact on the center place of our valleys, which is this great city. And this city is a world center, it's a regional center, and it's a series of great neighborhoods. And that's the vision I think the mayor's going for. So I think the biggest impact, frankly, is right here by driving the economy in the center. And then you have each of the stops. And we now have, how many stops do we have? Over 70 stops, all of which are now have a chance to evolve into great centers and other hotels. And we're seeing that along the road. But it's an effective Salt Lake City to have this transit system.
So it's huge. Robert mentioned that I grew up in Washington, D.C. I grew up there before Metro. And every time, I can tell you, and I take the Metro all the time when I'm in D.C., I think about that city without the major rails. I mean, they had Congress pay for 95% of it, I'm sure, but that's a benefit most of us don't have. But it has allowed Washington to succeed where rail exists. And if you look at development, as Robert was mentioning, if you look at development anywhere there's rail, it's where the stops are. And it completely transforms those areas. It becomes a walkable, livable community district, which is what the vast majority of people want for working and playing and living. In Salt Lake, it's really no different. We just opened our streetcar line, our first streetcar line since they were all shut down. Over 140 miles of streetcar lines were shut down here in the 40s, like most places around the country that had them. We just reopened our first one in December. Salt Lake City shares half of that one.
On an old rail track.
That's right, it's an old railroad line. Salt Lake City shares half that. It's a 2-mile line with South Salt Lake City. In the year and a half, from the time we announced we were going to build that line, thanks to a fiber grant, to the time it was completed, on the Salt Lake City side, we have $450 million of investment. It is completely transformed already, before it even opened. The kind of walkable community that everyone is striving for today. So it's a key. I don't know any other way around it.
I want to give you one company example. We have in our downtown Salt Lake, Goldman Sachs has a regional headquarters here. And it's a very interesting thing. If you go to their headquarters in New Jersey, you will see the clocks, the typical clocks that show London, New York, places in India and China and whatnot. But they have a clock with Salt Lake City on it. Now that's pretty interesting for this town. And it's sometimes people think you're stretching the stats when you say this, but Salt Lake City is their second largest employment center in the Americas. Not just North America, but in the Americas. So when I interact with Goldman Sachs folks in San Francisco and LA, we have a larger employment base here in Salt Lake City. And they love it because they've been it's part of their regional strategy. They've been transferring people from New York to Salt Lake City. And of course, they love our railroad.
They live for half as much and get to ski.
Next question. This may be something you haven't experienced. Glenn Goodwin, City of Springfield, Oregon. In Oregon, we've been planning continuously for the past 26 years. As probably you know, we have a rather unusual land use planning regime. And we've been going at it for a long, long time. And are now, of course, trying to recover from our second major recession. We tend to bleed very deeply when we do. But what we suffer most from is planning fatigue. We have had, as Robert knows this from when he was out there talking to us, we have had the same people involved continuously for those 26 years because they are all of the community leaders. What do we do now to do something different, when it's the same leaders involved, to re-energize them and get them willing to make the sort of commitments that the leadership in Salt Lake City has done.
And I've been to Lane County, and my wife turned out had a cousin in your town. I spent some time up there. She went with me. We had a great time. I think you have to start re-energizing, and it has to be a big enough picture and a big enough invite, and a big enough something to get people reattached to the process. And in Utah, we've just kicked off with our governor on point, a revisioning, an update of the quality growth strategy, essentially with better tools, a broader scope geographically, a broader scope intellectually, and so on. But that's helping re-energize what we're doing by starting with something big, not something small. And so my experience is, what Daniel Burnham said, make no small plans. And at the beginning of a process, if you want to re-energize people, you actually have to lay out something they feel is going to be different, bolder, can re-energize. I mean, I met a lot of your people who've been pushing this rock up the mountain for a long time. Sort of like, what's that? Myths, yeah, the myths, or whatever it is. You know, and if you stop, the rock rolls back down over you and it crushes you. I have dreams like that. Okay, and so I think you have to get more hands on the rock, and they have to see there's momentum and a chance to really make a difference. And so I think it's very specific to regions, but that's actually what we're doing right now. Is re-energizing, as Ralph said, take another look at what we need to do next. And so the question when we started was, we have 20 years, we're going to add 1 million people, how are we going to accommodate that? The question today is, by 2050, we're going to add 2.5 million more people and 2/3 of them your own children, grandchildren. How are we going to accommodate that? And that's what we've kicked off just now. So I think that's how you do it. I don't know of another way to get sort of an effort. And you're champions. I mean, we all flew up there to see you 15 years ago and see your light rail line and so on. So you should be proud of what you've done in your region. But that's how I think you do it. You've just got to say, okay. Let me just say one more thing. People are very concerned about jobs and the economy now, and you've got to loop from being sort of smart growth advocates to resilience advocates. That's the new word. And you've got to talk about the economy and things that are near and dear to people's hearts now, which is, how do I sustain my family? How am I going to take care of myself when I'm old? You know, and so on. And so I think that there's a whole economic side of this. And in 2002, Envision Utah actually did what was called an updated reassessment of our work, and we swung wider into the economic development side back then. So, and we're continuing to do that.
Yeah, I would just add, as really has been said, in terms of being opportunistic, I mean, what are the issues of the day that are driving people are most interested? That's what, we can frame what we do in terms of community development, right, in so many different ways. And taking advantage of really what people are most interested in, helping them understand the connections is huge. And Envision Utah was very able to do that. The other thing I would say, I'm a planner, and when I was running for this job, people say I was a planner when I would get anything done. And which of course I got defensive about. But the fact of the matter is that today, what I find is a shortcoming that we're learning how to tap better, is to really tap this millennial generation, this younger generation of folks who care deeply about their communities. They are oriented towards an urban lifestyle with amenities, the amenities they want, and are almost desperately distrustful of big institutions, including government. The challenge for us, I think, is to engage them and build trust in a way that they are as engaged in their communities as all of you around here. I mean, we are. It is, it's a different world, it's different approaches, it's different tools, but there's not a lack of interest or commitment, I find, with the incoming generation that will quickly succeed, certainly quickly succeed.
I think we have time for one last question before we move to a break. I do want to just correct one thing. The federal government only paid for about half of Washington's metro system. I say that as a proud Arlington, Virginia resident.
You've kind of started to get into the area that I want to question you about. My name is Tom DeBello. I'm Executive Director of Center for Great Neighborhoods. We're a community development organization in Covington, Kentucky. And some of you were mentioning public involvement and grassroots. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you did that, how you engaged, but also do you have a provision for the maintenance of that involvement, particularly in reference to what I would call maintaining political perseverance, keeping politicians and decision makers on focus?
Yeah, and Salt Lake City itself is doing a great job of public involvement. The way Envision Utah did that was we got a lot of earned media, so people knew what was going on. We didn't get a lot of paid media, but a lot of earned media, because what we were doing was interesting. And as Ralph said, we involved the press from the very beginning in the process. And then we held literally hundreds of public meetings. A lot of them were workshops. The people don't like to be lectured at, but they do like to put what they know to work, and they understand the problems of our urban areas, and they're really smart at how to fix them. And so they like to be listened to, they like to show us. And from those workshops, we pulled out the major themes for change that were shown in the scenarios work. So that workshop approach. I think the other thing is this effort to do sort of what I would call subvisions, pieces of the region with specific implementation visions. And we have about 20 plus of those we've done, averaging about 2 a year, where we've gone into an area and actually helped them come up with their own vision within the larger vision. And that public outreach then just rolls around in different places, and you engage them more locally. And if they're interested in the big picture, they're also interested in how the big picture affects their community, their town, their suburb, and so on. And so I think that's another way is to keep doing smaller projects while you do the updates of the larger ones, which are farther and farther apart.
Yeah, Envision Utah has been so successful, and I think it's for the reason that Bob said. People know now that when Envision Utah is doing something, they're not going to show up and get, 45 minutes of presentation, and then one person standing up at a time to make. They're going to really be participating in a very proactive way in outcomes, and that, if people feel like they can be involved meaningfully, they get involved, and they'll stay involved. And I think that's probably been the biggest key.
I would just add that when I have worked with public movements, visioning processes, campaigns, there's a real temptation to put a whole bunch of money into the technical work, say 80%, 90%, and then save 20 to 10% for your communications. And it's so common for us to go do the technical work, and then after we've got it all done, we call in the communications people and say, okay, write a press release or do a public announcement here. And I just think that's ridiculous. And I have found over the course of many years of doing this that the balance between technical work and communications work is more like 50-50. And that what happens is if you do your technical work and you can't communicate it very well, then you've got to do some more work. And they start to inform each other. And you get your very best technical work when the communication people are involved right from the beginning. And you get your best communication work when they understand the technical work right from the beginning. So I put them all in the room together, and I split that budget about 50-50, and I think that's a huge part of the success.
Thank you, Natalie. We're going to dismiss in just a moment for a brief break, about 15 minutes, before I get a round of applause for our participants, because I know people will stop paying attention then. Let me encourage you to get back here promptly 15 minutes after we dismiss. Let me also point out, we heard a mention of the millennial generation and engagement. If you are live tweeting this, #SCLA for Sustainable Communities Leadership Academy. Not the only way to engage the millennials, but one proven way. That out of the way, please help me thank Natalie Gochnour, Mayor Becker, and Robert Groh. And while the mayor and Natalie will not be with us the next 2 days, Robert will be with us, so if you want to continue to pick his brain about the Envision Utah experience, he'll be here for much of the next 2 days. Amy and Christy from over here are also Envision Utah experience staff, and Nate in the back corner, and there may be other Envision Utah people roaming around, I'm not sure. And with that, I'm going to dismiss us for a break. Please join us back here in 15 minutes, and we'll get the rest of the agenda started. Thank you.